Tucker recently sat down to interview the author of a new book on the crisis afflicting American men. Here's what happened.
If you look at the numbers, you quickly conclude that men are in crisis in America. Compared to women, they are far more likely to drop out of school, fail to graduate, go to jail, not hold a job, commit suicide, die of a drug overdose. And yet the establishment, and particularly the Democratic establishment, seems uninterested in all of this. And anything, they appear to think that men are still too successful and need to be held back. Andrew Yarrow is a former New York Times reporter, senior fellow with the Progressive Policy Institute. He just wrote an important new book called Man Out, Men on the Sidelines of American Life. He joins us tonight in studio. Mr. Yarrow, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
So I should preface it by saying I don't think you're a conservative activist, and that I'm also grateful that someone is saying this because the numbers support that it's true.
It is true. And as you say, the problem has really largely been ignored. I mean, Democrats and a lot of people in the country don't see men as having problems, but there are a lot of men who are struggling with work, struggling in families, struggling with health, a lot of areas I touch on in my book.
Well, to such a great extent that it would seem a crisis that affects everybody because, of course, men and women need each other to reproduce on the most basic level, but also everybody has a father, brothers, sons.
Right.
Why do you think it's been ignored?
Well, there's been a lot of political correctness in this country that's kind of made the main narrative be that, you know, women are the oppressed ones, and they have been historically oppressed. But, you know, that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of men struggling. I mean, it's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
And,
but it's been presented as one, that one sex succeeds only when another moves backward. Where'd that assumption come from?
Well, I think a lot of politics looks at things that way, and I think it's pretty unfortunate. But I think, you know, men have not been, in many ways, good at advocating for themselves.
Yes.
I mean, it's been interesting in the last few elections. A lot of the political activists have been women. I mean, you hear more from women these days. I mean, men aren't good at forming groups anymore.
Yes. So you work at the Progressive Policy Institute. You're a fellow there. That's not the Heritage Foundation.
Right.
I think it's fair to say you probably work in a mostly liberal world. Mm-hmm. What kind of reaction did your piece get among people you know?
Well, it's interesting. Conservative media have tended to like it more. It's you know, it's kind of troubling that this should be a bipartisan issue. I mean, all Americans should be doing well or should have the opportunity to do well. And they should also have justice behind them. I mean, men are being accused wrongly. I mean, there are a lot of awful things that men do, don't get me wrong.
Well, sure.
But you know, the lack of due process and some of these sexual assault allegations, it's, you know, it's pretty troubling.
It's just interesting because the most progressive president the country's ever had, FDR, 4 terms, the first thing he did after getting elected in 1932, the very first piece through the Congress was the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was aimed at young men, just men between 18 and 25 or something like that, getting them back to work and restoring their vitality through work. What would happen if a Democrat in the modern era suggested something like that?
Well, you'd think it would play well. You know, while the unemployment statistics look good, there are a lot of men who've either been pushed out of the labor force or dropped out. I mean, there are about 18% of 25 to 64-year-old men who aren't working. And, you know, there are a lot of younger men who are neither in school or working. So, you know, why is that? And, you know, why can't we create better jobs for them? And yes, I mean, you'd think a Democrat would pitch some kind of jobs program.
I mean, this is a longer conversation, but I think the answer is toxic masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, that...
Whatever that means.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's become the phrase du jour, I guess. I mean, there are clearly issues with masculinity. You know, I interviewed a lot of men and some women around the country, about 200, and a lot of men told me, a lot of, you know, even liberal men said, well, feminism's done a lot for women, but what's it done for me?
That's a fair question, and you ask it in this book. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.